Error451, an occasionally weekly podcast on tech security from an analyst's perspective. I'm your host, Bursts to Goodness. I'm speaking with Kali Kaneko. Kali is involved in LEAP, or the LEAP Encryption Access Project. We're going to talk about this tool set that they're developing and some of the reasons they're working on this. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat, Kali.
Thanks to you for the interest in the things that we do.
Can you tell listeners about your background and how you got into programming?
I think I personally am an outlier in the project. I am coming from the academia, from something not strictly related to computer science, but I got into computer modules, and I've been surrounded by computers for a long time. And one thing leads to another, and one day you are developing free software.
And can you tell listeners about just what LEAP is and why it's being developed generally?
Yeah, LEAP stands for LEAP Encryption Access Project, as you said, and it is a project aiming at making encryption easy to use, and that has like two parts. We aim at making encryption easy to use for end users, like in the applications that you use in your mobile and your desktop. But also a very important part is to make encryption and security faults of crypto easy to use by the people that wants to provide secure services on the internet. So we also have a part for, let's say, sysadmins or people from techno-political projects that want to deploy those services. And for now, we are focusing on two big areas. One is tools for providing VPNs, virtual private networks, and encrypted email.
And for those communities, the people that are involved in, so right now, the people that are using encryption generally tend to be people who are more careful or thoughtful, or try to be, about what information's getting out about themselves and who it's getting to. And you're talking about widening the scope of the people that are able to access this sort of technology. Can you talk about why those people who aren't paying attention maybe should be paying attention? There's the argument, for instance, that if I don't have anything to hide, why should I care about encrypting my data or my metadata?
Yeah. Let me think a little bit about this. I think in reality, when people says that, they don't actually mean that, because I think it's quite proven that when someone says I don't have anything to hide, they don't hand you the password for their email. So in a lot of occasions, I got the experience that people thought that the level of effort they have to invest to have security is too much for what they are willing to do in terms of changes to their tools or changes to their habits or whatever. So in a lot of cases, when you say and you explain and you show that it isn't so expensive in terms of habits and some personal changes to have a little bit more of privacy, people is willing to take that if it comes for free, let's say. But more generally, I think privacy, and many people think privacy is a right. So it is a right that is needed for healthy societies, because you don't know how data you produce is going to be used in the future, taking into account the ability to deploy drug surveillance, and given the time span of the data retention nowadays, it can be dangerous to keep too many data about everyone, basically. So, in a way, total visibility about everyone's data is a very easy path to totalitarianism.
Yeah, that kind of sounds like something out of the Black Mirror TV show, like where the right to be forgotten is a thing that's worked around, and where that's not an expectation within society, where if you make a mistake at some point, that is constantly going to be brought up in every application for a job interview, every first date, every court hearing. And that's something in the United States that we don't have, not that we should be relying on state structures to provide us our safety. But I mean, that's exactly kind of the problem there, right? In the U.S., we don't have the right to be forgotten. Whereas I think in the EU recently, they passed some laws at least limiting the length of time that people's prior information on the internet can be archived. Is that right?
Yeah, in a way, I think the people writing the plots for Black Mirror, they are saying that they are not writing science fiction. They are just stressing a little bit more, highlighting some aspects of our reality, and that changes from place to place for sure. But in the end, I think what is important for people, for normal users of the technologies and the internet, is not so much to think about magic bullets in terms of this tool buys me security. This is very dangerous to think that a given technology or a tool keeps you safe from any adversary that you might have. I think that is not healthy. I think it's more valuable to think more in terms of processes and to understand how technology works, because in the end, I like to see it as it is a very asymmetrical distribution of power that there is in the internet nowadays in terms of what is visible to whom. And being a little bit more careful about how your data disseminates and how your data is being used for, maybe that is something that you like to have.
Well, that sounds like an awesome opportunity to talk about the concept of pseudonymity. I know when a lot of people think, I think of like security or encryption or just hiding their personal data on the internet, they think of it in terms of being invisible or going places and not being captured or not being seen or noticed. And it seems like the approach that a lot of tech security projects are working towards is not so much the idea of not being noticed, but as leaving as little trace as possible. Can you talk about the importance of pseudonymity in terms of this when it comes to communicating or browsing on the internet?
Pseudonymity, in a way, is just another tool in your tool set. Part of the trap of surveillance is to assume that to take for granted that your identity is one single monolithic thing that exists forever. And in many cases, if you have the chance, maybe you want to have throwaway identities or to have separate identities for different contexts. If you think about it, many harmful things that happen on the net can be more or less avoided, or at least their impact can be lessened if you separate, for instance, your work identity from your family identity or your friend's identity or your activism. It is very difficult to dox a person if they are not exposing all their data in all their interactions. So, in a way, separating that is useful. In the context of browsing, particularly, one thing that you are leaking by default to your ICP, to your government, to the people around you in a unsafe hotspot is your location. So having an exit point that is not your default exit point is a way of masking part of this metadata you are leaking. It is okay. I think that's for this part.
Could we talk a little bit about VPN since we're on that subject? And when you say exit point, you mean like the address to which the website is sending data as correlates to a geospatial or geographic address? Is that about right?
Right. When I send a request to a given internet site, that server is receiving a request on my site to get a given resource. It can be a web page, an image, or whatever. So that site for sure is seeing where my request is coming from. But my ISP also is seeing transparently all my requests to the domains I'm requesting, and if they are not TLS, they also see the content of this transmission. So VPN is a way of encrypting a part of this trip that the information travels on the internet in a way that it isn't visible to my ISP or to my local neighbors in the net what I'm requesting from where. So in a way, the VPN is shifting the trust relation you have with your provider from your ISP to your provider of the VPN service. I don't know if, like, as an aside, as I told you in the email, I don't know if this is a very nice way of conveying this thing. Like, we always say this is an encrypted tunnel, and we take for granted that people knows what encrypted tunnel can mean. If you want, I can give a try to this metaphor I was thinking about the jail. I don't know if it might be useful or not.
Yeah, having communicated with a number of people in prisons, I think that it's a pretty useful metaphor. If the more secure, trusted partner in transferring information, for instance, is having an in-person visit as opposed to like trying to use a phone or the mail or email or whatever. Yeah, I say go ahead with it.
So just as a mental experiment, and taking for granted that it's a metaphor and we cannot stretch it too much, let's say we live in a jail and we have a certain filter or censorship or blockade about the things we can request from the outside. We have no access to computers or internet or maybe not even books. So if you are an inmate and you want to access some information from the outside world, one way you could use is to relay your request for information to a person living in the outside world. That might be in the form of a letter, or that might be in the form of a message to a person that is visiting you. So in that way, your request might skip the initial censorship or the initial filter. If you can come up with a way of encoding your request in a way that the guards don't block it. So in this metaphor, the guards might be your ISP. In the US, it might be Verizon or I don't know, Comcast or whatever big telco that gives you the access to the internet. They are your gateways to the internet. And you can choose between one guard or another, but you are very limited in your options. On the other hand, you can choose from a much bigger set of options as to where to relay your request from, and then you are trusting more on this gateway, on this routing.
Yeah, I think that approach makes a lot of sense. Can you talk a little bit about how, like, in a way that won't totally overwhelm people who aren't tech nerds like myself, just how that approach of a VPN works, like how the structure of it works, and how the bitmask application in that way would facilitate a more secure communication that would get around the jail guards?
So technically, but in very lay terms, you are running a client, a VPN client that is going, first of all, it is going to bootstrap a trusted connection, verifying the authenticity of this provider. It is going to create an encrypted tunnel through which we are going to route all the rest of the communications going out to the network in your computer. So in a way, it's like giving you another virtual wireless card, if you want. And we are going to get all the requests to web pages, all the requests to, for instance, download your email through that virtual wireless card in your computer. In a way that your ISP or your local network is only seeing encrypted traffic. They cannot decide whether to block it or not, because all they see is encrypted traffic until it arrives to your VPN provider. So there are two things. There is the application, and in the application that we do, that application is called Bitmask. And there is the selection of the provider that you choose to trust for being the outside gateway for your request to download web pages or whatnot.
I guess, like, to tie back to, again, the person who is like, yeah, well, this sounds pretty complicated, and I don't really care if this site or that site sees me like visiting. I can go see porn. I'm an adult. I can like look at these products. It doesn't matter. Just really briefly, would you talk about like why the sort of, there's like the negative side of biopower and the measuring of how we as individuals interact with, say, the market or communication that a state could apply, but there's also like the quote unquote positive approach that the market could apply, and how this approach towards VPNs and pseudonymity can affect what internet we see as we move forward, if that makes sense.
Yes, but it's a very tough question, I think. I mean, I would say if you're happy with Black Friday, just go for it. Just sell your data and be happy with whatever that war brings you. And that's it. Everyone should do and should use whatever they make them happy. But if you are skeptical, and chances are that if you are listening to this, you are a little bit skeptical and you are involved in some kind of struggles, I think it's important to stress that all struggles are not disconnected. So, in a way, the work that we bring forward by letting some agents in the free market selling and reselling and trafficking with our data, that is going to shape technology and for sure an internet and a sort of human relations that is going to bring consequences. For instance, there in that part of the planet, you know a little bit about how do you call it? I blank out. Net neutrality. Okay, yeah, net neutrality. Okay, so some places are having troubles with net neutrality because the market is enforcing a super speedy information highway that is not equal for everyone. So for some time we had a chance to have our data traveling at the same speed and with the same priority, and then that is not written in stone. In the future, in 10 years from now, someone can decide that there are first class and second class citizens on the internet, and that's going to affect people. If some system decides that some content shouldn't be published, then that content is going to be taken down. So in a way, our actions and how we model our collectives and our interactions with other entities in the net also shapes the internet. Maybe too abstract, I don't know. I think I digressed there.
I kind of jumped on you with that question without giving you any warning, but no, I think that's a good approach, having an eye towards the future. So let me see. So you've talked about a few different agents that facilitate our communication with each other and with other outside parties through this technology, like ISPs, for instance, that could limit one thing or another. But so if it's a matter of not trusting those facilities or those organizations or those businesses, can you talk about how to approach then the move towards pseudonymity? Like how do we trust Leap or any of the projects that are affiliated with Leap? Can you talk about like Calyx and Rise Up just really briefly, and maybe how having a federative model towards these technologies can sort of resolve some of the questions about, is this technology or is this application more secure and whose interests it has in mind?
First of all, I would say you don't have to trust anyone. Trust no one. One thing I think we are very lucky of having is that as this project, as Leap, we don't need to sell you any product, while traditional startups and companies and other entities on the internet are trying to sell you and to monetize on the product. We are developing tools for other people to deploy services, and it's up to them if they want to ask money for the services or if they have other ideas for sustainability. So in this sense, we are working mainly with 2-3 consolidated providers on the internet that by now they are non-profits, and they have their own models for relating to their use base. For instance, you might have heard about RiseUp. RiseUp is a well-established 20-year-old tech collective in Seattle working for social change, and they ask for donations. We have Calix Institute. It is a small ISP in New York City, and we are working also with Código Sur. This is a South American activist-based service provider. So this is the organizations that deploy the tools that we make, and actually currently we are working on kind of branding the applications so they are even more less generic and more branded to the collectives.
So most of the side that we've talked about with the application, at least with Bitmask, has been the user side of it and why VPNs are useful. How easy would it be for someone to deploy a Bitmask server and run the VPN through one of their own computers?
For the people that is on the sysadmin side of the project, it is quite easy. As easy as if you have the right tools, typing a few commands on a command line. For sure, you have to have a context of what you are doing, but if you are a competent sysadmin and you're familiar with the technology, then it shouldn't be more than half an hour. We've done that on the workshops we make quite often.
So, I mean, at least since the Snowden revelations, there's been a lot more discussion about encryption and about metadata and people's personal data getting out there and who's hoovering it up or who's sucking it up. But what if someone says, so don't we already have a lot of encryption available? Like people are more and more using, especially as generations change, mobile devices to communicate with each other, using Signal, WhatsApp, Telegram, Wire, and so on. And a lot of those also have desktop application versions. Is there anything that Leap brings to the table in terms of usability that these don't offer, or in terms of like a different model?
Yes and no. If you're asking for an instant messaging app, the answer is no. But all the applications you've mentioned, they are for mobile, and they also share a commonality that is by design, they don't interoperate with each other. So in a meta level, a more abstract level, the bet of interoperability is something we very strongly believe in. That means that we believe in a world in which you can have your app and your provider and if you want, a business model, and you still can communicate with people in the rest of the world. And we bet on email. This is a hypothesis that needs to be validated. Maybe next generations drop email, but we think that for now, for the next years, email is here to stay, so we prefer to fix encryption in there rather than rolling our own thing.
So coming to email, can you talk about the email portion of how Leap operates? I mean, I guess, and just to belay the point, like if you can just set up an email through any number of different providers. It doesn't matter what platform you're using. It doesn't matter if you have a GUI or not, like whether a user interface with a graphical user interface or whatever, or a mobile device or a desktop or whatever. Email seems like it's been around for a while and it'll continue being cross-platform. But can you talk about the approach that y'all are taking towards email? For instance, we just talked recently with someone from the Pretty Easy Protection Foundation, which has been working with Thunderbird and Outlook and other carriers of PGP and GPG to sort of engage that at an easier user level. Can you talk about the way that Leap is trying to engage around ease of end-to-end encryption with email?
Sure. First of all, I'd like to say that email in our project is not a stable solution. We've been experimenting with it in the past. We've done some proof of concepts, but for the last year, we are not developing it actively. In a way, our architecture, our approach is similar to what I understand that PEP is trying to do. And in a way also, it is part of what a bigger movement is coming up with in terms of new developments on how to fix email, let's say. There is a lot of initiatives, and we kind of overlap as we are people concerned about the privacy of communications with projects like AutoCrypt, Memory Hole, the likes. We all share an interest in making the old email a little bit more secure. So, bottom line, we offer a local proxy that runs on your computer, to which you can talk with your mail user agent, with your mail program. So we also have a Thunderbird plugin that communicates with this program that you have running, and that automatically encrypts. It does different things. A big part of it is that we try to transparently select and manage the key material, the GPG keys for the user, because one important barrier for adoption in GPG for 30 years has been loading too much work on the shoulders of the user. So we try to transparently, but not completely hiding it, manage your GPG identities on your behalf. And once you discover the keys for encrypting to a friend, to an unknown person, you opportunistically encrypt that. Basically that's it. Also, bottom line, I'd like to say, an important part also is that the provider in this architecture, in this idea of how things should work, the provider, even though you put a lot of trust on it, shouldn't have access to the content of your emails, and also should know the less metadata about your communication that is technically possible.
Yeah, so this kind of came up, I guess, a couple of years ago now when RiseUp came out publicly. One of their canaries that says that, this little thing online that says we have not been communicated or contacted by law enforcement and forced to have material subpoenaed. That flag basically went off, and they explained that they had been visited by law enforcement in the United States where the servers are, or some of them at least, and been forced to retrieve information about someone who had broken some of the protocols or some of the end user agreements. And this seems like a good approach towards whether it be a long-standing activist email service like RiseUp or Gmail. Like, if the material is not unencrypted and in their hands, then they have nothing to give away. So it kind of it actually protects your email providers too, right?
Right. When you're doing operational security, one very important thing is to not to leave too many things to chance. So that means that if you can encrypt in transit, you encrypt in transit. But also, if you can design for encrypting at rest, that means if your password never arrives the server, the provider, in the case the provider would turn malicious to you, the provider cannot do anything with something that it doesn't have. So one very important concept is letting the provider know the less amount of information possible about you. For sure, not accessing your plain text email, but also your own computer, because tech-savvy users can decide to do full disk encryption, but also if you decide as a programmer that your application should encrypt in disk by default, then you are taking less risks if you lose your device.
So as opposed to the messaging apps that I mentioned before, like Signal and Telegram, there's also a few email services that have opened up in the last couple of years that I've heard tech-savvy people talk about as being a smarter approach towards emailing. And the two that spring to my mind, at least, is free services that are, I think, at least somewhat, I think they're open source. At least Tutanota I've heard described as such, and ProtonMail are available, and you can pay as you go if you'd like to, and get access to more email addresses and domain names and more space on their servers. But can you talk about like what might be strengths or weaknesses on relying on projects like this, mostly web-based or app-based end-to-end encrypted email programs? It seems like it kind of falls into the hole of somebody else has to have this same program, if nothing else, or the same kind of account to be able to access encryption. And also, I don't know if there's any trust issues with their servers or not.
Yes, I would say there are two broad categories of answers to that question. One category is technical aspects, and the other is social or economical aspects. From the technical side, I would say the lack of interoperability is a downside, at least for some people. Because if you are logging people into your application, you are just concentrating information and therefore concentrating power. You are aiming at being the next secure Gmail, and you shouldn't put all the eggs on the same basket. Another critic, a very common critic, is that the trade-off between usability and security is a bit weird on the browser, because when you are executing a browser application running JavaScript, you are downloading the code every time you open the application. So some people criticize that there is no good way of certifying that the code you are running is the code. Let's say it is open source, but there is no solid way of ensuring that the code you are running as a user is the code that everyone else read and audited. And on the economical, social side, those are companies. So if you trust them because you pay them, good for you. But how decisions are made might, in some case, affect your security. For instance, there was a lot of controversy some time ago with WhatsApp when they rolled out end-to-end crypto, because it is true that companies are also realizing that people is demanding privacy. WhatsApp rolled out end-to-end crypto, but they took a very delicate decision about whether to hide or not the eventuality that your keys have changed. So let's say that there are technical decisions that might have serious security consequences, that when you are taking them because you have to answer to the board of directors of your entity, then you are not taking some other factors into account. So in the end, the high-profile activist security is not your number one reason to change technical matters.
So about the key exchange thing, were you referring to like how in Signal it'll tell you when somebody's secure key has changed, and therefore you could reassess if your relationship with them over the app is secure or not? It's possible that someone had gotten a hold of their phone, or they changed phone numbers, or somebody had been able to spoof their SIM card or something like that. Like that sort of approach?
Exactly. I think Moxie Marlinspike, the creator of Signal, was very vocal about this particular topic, and many people think that Signal did the right thing. And I think the lesson is that in the end, with security, with technology, there is no free lunch, there is no magic. You can aim at making things comfortable and usable and easy to use, but there are complexities that you shouldn't hide from user. So in a way, using Signal in this case, it's just another example, but it is very applicable to email and everyday use of crypto. There is a relation with the user in which the user has to take some responsibility. At least take some time. You can make it more eye candy, or you can make it very nice to use, but responsibility of checking if your contact is who he says it is in the user. So at least you should know it to say something has changed. Just check it on a side channel. Yeah, and I was talking about that kind of little details that can be very meaningful in the end.
So one of the critiques that you mentioned about like Tutanota or Proton Mail or some of these other WhatsApp is the fact that they are companies that are funded by maybe by people paying for subscriptions in some cases, like with Proton Mail, but they definitely have a bottom line that they're working from, and that's how they pay the programmers to do the work that they're doing, and also that's a part of the relationship of trust supposedly that they have with their user bases. Like, you are paying for security, we are trying to keep you as secure as possible so that we can have good name recognition, so we can get more customers and continue having you as a customer. So does Leap charge for its applications? Does it pay its workers or the people that do the production for their work? And if not, what motivates people to diligently pay attention to these small little needs like key exchanges or whatever that a user might be relying on to some degree?
I would say that for those companies, the important fact is not that they charge for the service, but that their measure of success is not the same measure of success that if the ecosystem grows. Like, for them, being successful is to grow themselves at the expense of the other companies, the adversaries, growing less. So in a way, they want to avoid to being interoperable. Coming back to your question, yes, most of the Leap main developers have been paid for the last years, and mostly we are getting money through research projects and public funding. And what was the other question?
And so you've mentioned like people getting remuneration for doing the work that they're doing, which is time exhausting and I'm sure mentally exhausting for people. But as a part of the trust relationship, like, how do users know that the folks that are working on Leap actually have our best interests in mind as much as we can? Like, what's motivating people from Leap to do this work? So you said they're getting paid. I guess that was like the majority of the question. Never mind.
No, maybe one important thing to say here is that another interesting feature of this kind of federated model is that the entity providing you the software doesn't have any interest on you buying the service. Like, Leap in this case develops software for providers to use, but since we are not offering our services, we don't have any interest in dragging you to a particular solution over another. So in a way that also decouples very nicely the collectives that need to seek sustainability for the services, because servers cost money and hardware cost money, infrastructure in general cost money, and collectives need to be aware that the services that they are using are costing money somewhere to someone. But the cost of producing the software is solved in a separate manner.
That's great. That actually addressed what I was trying to get at now that I think about it, because I was wondering, like, there's that whole adage that which is much mentioned, if there's no cost, if someone's providing something for free to someone, then that, like, the user is the product. And if you've made it as impossible as possible for y'all to collect user information and you're not charging us for a service, then that begs the question, what sustains you and what gets you going. So if there's not a specific pull to try to draw users towards you, that sort of promises that, or seems to promise that you're not trying to use us as a source of metadata to sell on to someone else.
I think I read an article about free VPN apps in the Android market, and I think a very high number of those contained spyware, I think it was spyware. So in a way, bootstrapping trust, deciding who you trust on the internet is a very hard question. And I think part of the answer to that is to decentralize that choice. So if you have a way of trusting more your local tech environment, just go with them, or just choose randomly from somewhere else in the planet. But the more options you have and the more ways of getting to think that you can trust those guys because what they say about not keeping your logs or not using your data for trading it or for making money, then might be true. Maybe it's just because you know one of the techies doing that, or maybe it's that because they sounded very convincing on a tech demo in some congress. Or maybe they just have very nice cats on their webpage.
Cats are usually the basis for me trusting someone or not. Well, what's coming? Well, okay, just to reiterate, so y'all have Bitmask for as a plugin for Thunderbird. You have Bitmask VPN connected to that as a desktop program that's cross-platform, and you also have a mobile app, right? Are those all pretty easy to get a hold of?
Yes. Right now, like during last year, we've been working more closely with RiseUp, that is the bigger provider using our software, to produce something even more simple to use than we had before. Before we had a generic application called Bitmask that was kind of heavy and it was nicely visually, but it had some problems. And then we decided to go back to a more basic approach to the product. And then you have RiseUp VPN for Mac, for Windows, for Linux. It is in the Ubuntu store. You can download it from their beta page. And you have also a beta for Android, and our challenges for the future would be to have more development on the email side of things to allow for the email part to leave the beta stage. And also we want to dedicate more development time to mobile, especially there is nothing for iOS right now, and we could improve the support in Android.
So that's kind of the horizon at the moment, the next steps for the Leap?
Yes, as I said, the same thing that the RiseUp did, like branding this with their icon and their own custom things. Like more providers can use the software to have custom builds for their brand. And yeah, we want to improve basically I think we are good on the Linux support, but we want to be more stable on Mac and Windows.
Well, Kali, thank you so much. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that I forgot to ask you about that you wanna mention?
Nothing comes to my mind. I think I spoke too much.
No, I think you did great. Is there a place that people can find, besides on the Leap site, is there are there any places that people can find your work or your writing or anything on the internet that you want to direct them to?
Basically, our main channel of communication is the leap.sc webpage. We are also as Tech Dinosaurs, we are on IRC, and we have a mailing list called leap@lists.riseup.net, and any person is welcome in there.
Well, thank you so much for all this awesome work, and thanks a lot for making this work across an ocean. I really appreciate it. It was great chatting with you.
Same here.
If you'd like to hear more of these chats or our weekly radio show on anarchist actions and ideas, check out thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org.
Fight the planet!